Imagine you rule a kingdom on the edge of the known world. To the west, barbarian tribes raid your borders. To the east, powerful kingdoms see you as backward and weak. Your state is not respected, your people are not refined, your survival is not guaranteed. And every few decades you watch another kingdom disappear from the map. Conquered, absorbed, erased. You could be next. This was Qin in the 4th century BCE, a frontier state that everyone expected to vanish. A kingdom that seemed destined to become a footnote in someone else's history. But Qin didn't vanish. Instead, it did something extraordinary. It turned fear into discipline, discipline into strength, and strength into the most powerful war machine the ancient world had ever seen. Within 150 years, this backward frontier state had conquered every rival and unified China for the first time in history. Not because it was the strongest at the beginning, not because it wanted to rule the world, but because it was the most afraid. And fear, it turned out, was the most powerful motivator of all. This is the story of how the state that feared extinction the most became the empire that dominated everything. By the time of the Warring States period, China had already seen centuries of conflict. In earlier times, there had been dozens, even hundreds of small states. But over time, they vanished. Some were conquered, some were absorbed, some simply disappeared from the map. By the 4th century BCE, only 7 major powers remained. Every ruler understood the same truth. The number of states was shrinking, and one day there might be only one left. In such a world, peace was not always the safest option. Sometimes, survival meant expansion. Qin was different from the other states. It was not in the cultural heartland of China. It sat on the western frontier, closer to the steppe than to the great cities of the east. Its land was rough, its people were seen as less refined, its traditions were not as respected. But Qin had one advantage. It had fewer illusions. The great states of the east, Qi, Chu, Wei, Zhao, still believed in their ancient prestige. They had noble families, long histories, and confidence in their place in the world. Qin had none of that. It lived closer to danger, closer to invasion, closer to extinction. And states that live close to extinction often change faster than those that feel safe. In the 4th century BCE, a reformer named Shang Yang arrived in Qin. He proposed something radical. Not because it was ideal, not because it was humane, but because it was effective. He argued that a state should not rely on noble birth, old traditions, or personal loyalty. It should rely on strict laws, measurable achievements, and absolute discipline. Most states could not accept such ideas. Their noble families were too powerful, their traditions were too deep, their courts were too divided. But Qin was different. It had fewer traditions to protect and more reasons to be afraid. So Qin accepted the reforms that other states rejected. Under Shang Yang's reforms, Qin society was reorganized around one principle. Everything must serve the survival of the state. Farmers were rewarded for producing more grain, soldiers were promoted for killing more enemies, officials were judged by results, not family name. Even noble titles could be earned by commoners. In other states, your birth decided your future. In Qin, your performance decided your rank. The system was harsh, punishments were severe, laws were unforgiving, but the rules were clear. And in a dangerous world, clarity could be more valuable than kindness. As Qin grew stronger, something unexpected happened. Success made Qin less safe, not more, because the other states could see what Qin had become. In 318 BCE, 5 states formed a coalition to attack Qin. They called it the Vertical Alliance. Their goal was simple: destroy Qin before Qin destroyed them. Qin survived the attack, but the message was clear. The stronger Qin became, the more threatened its neighbors felt. And threatened neighbors do not surrender. They unite. This is what modern strategists call the security dilemma. When one state becomes powerful enough to defend itself, it becomes powerful enough to threaten others. And threatened states do not stay passive. They form alliances. All the other major states began to see the same threat. They saw what Qin had become, a disciplined machine, a state that could mobilize resources faster than anyone else, a power that was still hungry. And they understood what historians would later confirm. In a system of rival states, there is no such thing as defensive strength. All strength is potentially offensive. Imagine you are the king of Qin in 250 BCE. You've just received intelligence. The state of Chu is secretly meeting with Jiao. They're discussing an alliance against you. You have three options. Option 1, do nothing. Hope they don't attack. Option 2, send diplomats. Try to negotiate. Option 3, strike first, before they're ready. What would you do? This was not a hypothetical exercise. This was the daily reality of Qin's rulers. And they knew what happened to states that chose option 1 or 2. They disappeared from the map. So again and again, Qin chose option 3. Not because it was right, but because hesitation felt like suicide. So Qin's rulers faced an impossible choice. Stop expanding. Give neighbors time to recover. Give them time to form stronger alliances. Give them time to copy Qin's reforms. And then wait for the inevitable counterattack. Or keep expanding. Eliminate threats one by one. Prevent coalitions from forming. Never give enemies time to prepare. Qin chose to keep expanding, not because it wanted to rule the world, but because, in the logic of the warring states, stopping looked more dangerous than continuing. This is the terrible math of the security dilemma. The more secure you try to become, the more threatened others feel. The more threatened they feel, the more they prepare to attack you. The more they prepare, the more you must expand. And once that cycle begins, there is only one way to stop it. Eliminate all rivals. So Qin did not conquer China because it was ambitious. Qin conquered China because it was afraid. And it believed, perhaps correctly, that conquest was the only guarantee of survival. Over time, the differences between Qin and the other states became obvious. In many Eastern kingdoms, noble families competed for influence. Court politics slowed decisions. Generals came from powerful clans. But in Qin, officials rose through merit. Laws applied to everyone. The state controlled resources directly. The entire society was organized around a single goal: victory. Qin was not the richest state. It was not the most cultured. It was not the most elegant. But it was the most organized. And in a world of constant war, organization often mattered more than tradition. By the 3rd century BCE, Qin had become the strongest military power in China. One by one, the rival states fell. Han disappeared first, then Jiao, then Wei, then Chu, the largest of them all, then Yan, and finally Qi. By 221 BCE, only one state remained: Qin. For the first time in history, all the major lands of China were under a single ruler. The king of Qin gave himself a new title: the First Emperor. The old feudal world was over. A new empire had been born. But Qin's greatest achievement was not the conquest itself. It was what came after. For centuries, China had been divided into separate systems. Each state had its own laws, coins, writing styles, and measurements. Under the Qin, these were unified. For the first time, people across vast distances lived under the same rules. China was no longer just a land of many states. It was becoming a single political civilization. But the system that allowed Qin to survive was also the system that made it fragile. Its laws were strict, its punishments were harsh, its demands were heavy. The empire built great roads, massive palaces, and enormous walls. All of it required labor, all of it required obedience. Qin had built a state that could conquer the world, but it had not built a state that people loved. And within 15 years, the empire would collapse. The story of Qin leaves behind more than history. It leaves behind a paradox. A state built on fear of extinction had no purpose. Once extinction was no longer possible. A system designed for war had no function in peace. And so the empire that feared death the most died the fastest. But the question it left behind remains. In a competitive world, is it possible to be strong enough to survive without becoming so strong that you destroy the very stability you sought? This is not just ancient history. Today, we might call this the logic of the arms race, or the Cold War, or the tech race between superpowers. The pattern is always the same. One side builds strength to feel safe. The other side sees that strength as a threat, so they build more strength in response. And soon, both sides are locked in a cycle where stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. Think about the US and USSR during the Cold War. Each side claimed they were only defending themselves. Both were telling the truth, and both were lying. Think about tech companies today. Amazon didn't set out to conquer retail. It wanted to survive disruption. But survival required constant expansion. And constant expansion eventually looked like conquest. Think about cybersecurity arms races. Every defense system can become an offensive weapon. Every measure of protection can be seen as preparation for attack. Qin believed it was defending itself. But from the perspective of Zhao, Wei, and Chu, Qin looked like an aggressor that would never stop. And they were both right. Because in a world where survival depends on relative power, defense and offense become impossible to distinguish. The question Qin faced 2,300 years ago is the same question we face today. In a competitive system, can you ever be strong enough? Or does the pursuit of security inevitably become the pursuit of dominance? Qin found one answer. Expand until there are no rivals left. It unified China. It built an empire. It achieved absolute security. And then it discovered the final paradox. A state that exists only to survive has no reason to exist once survival is guaranteed. Within 15 years of achieving perfect security, the Qin Empire collapsed. Not from external enemies, but from internal exhaustion. Because the people who had sacrificed everything for survival had nothing left to give for peace. That is the legacy of Qin. Not just the first empire, but the first empire to prove that winning can be harder to survive than losing. And 2,300 years later, we are still learning that lesson.